Chairs here.
You just gotta get called and
You have one.
I ask fewer questions when I'm in the front because I get to see it. I don't miss things.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the League of Progressive Seniors and Souls to the Polls joint forum. We are really honored today to have two very well-known speakers, Senator Chris Larson, and Carolyn Woodall from the City Election Commission. First of all, for the technicalities, did I say your name wrong?
Claire.
Claire, what did I say for you?
Carolyn, but I would respond to anything. I've been called much worse.
This is the sign of dementia. Anyway.
Better than
call her
greater.
sweetheart, okay? The other thing I want to let you know is all of you have on your chairs this little index card. Before you leave, we'd ask that you would put your name on there, print it if you can't because we can't read well, and put your number on it. What you're doing when you do that is that you were committing to sending 5 emails out of the videotaping of this program today. We video it. It will be on YouTube, but will be through our webpage, League of Progressive Seniors. So you'll get that, and then you're pledging that you'll send it out because we really need to make sure that this information gets out to as broad an audience as possible. All right, given that, if we have 3 chairs up here if anyone wants them, and I think there's one over here, and one over here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So please feel free to come and take the seats. I will now leave it to Anita Johnson. And thank you again, and thanks to the Knickerbocker for allowing us to use this room.
Good morning. Souls to the Polls is a nonprofit organization. We believe that voting is our collective power, a tool that we can build stronger, safer, and more supportive communities. Souls to the Polls is a partner with the League of Progressive Seniors because they are an organization striving to be a force for change and be a voice for social and economical change. Today, we are having this forum to update you on threats to our votes. We hope that you learn from our experts and we can't say this enough, share this information with your friends and your family. Share this information with your friends, your family, people you go to church with, people on the streets. Do not keep it to yourself. Share this information. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Thank you and welcome.
We really shouldn't be having this program 60 years after the Voting Rights Act, whatever the exact noting is. Who would know that we'd still be fighting about voter rights and access to the ballot? But we are. I recently saw a video put on by the Southern Law Center, and they claimed that across the country there were 360 bills to suppress voting. I bet that's a way under. I don't. Chris will elucidate us, but I'm sure there's lots of bills in our state legislature and start compounding that across the country. I'm sure it's a lot more. And in a minute, we're going to have the speakers talk about it. But before we do, we wanted to flip the strategy about how we're going to run this meeting. And that is, first, what do you want to know? So our speakers then can sort of address some of those questions.
How can we use our time most effectively to help people vote?
How can we get not only on the defensive, but to get on the offensive to make voting stronger, especially in a year like this when there's going to be a lot of defensive.
Okay? Anybody else? Go ahead.
How do we restore faith in the system?
Hey, anybody else with what you want to leave your note?
Is there anything really we can do about the gerrymandering that's happening? I know that's partly the reason we're here, but it seems like it's a done deal.
After Election Day, there's going to be a period of time, just like we learned in 2020, it's going to run from the election to the inauguration. And the problem then will be not getting the vote out, but protecting the results. Is anybody paying attention to that problem in Wisconsin?
Is our system verifiable? If Claire could talk about that a little, it'd be ideal.
All right, two more questions, two more comments.
Is there a strategy for addressing any sabotages that they may try to make on our election, like during the election?
One more question. Anybody else? Stand back.
Is there any way we can help push forward the notion, this proposal coming forward about starting tabulation of early ballots prior to the closing of the polls on Election Day proper?
Okay, so our first speaker today is going to be Senator Chris Larson. Chris has been a. Oh, you want to go second? Okay. For those, everybody here probably knows Chris at some level, but he's been a state senator in the Milwaukee area for 13 years. Before that, he was on the county board, and he's been really a progressive voice, sometimes in the wilderness in Madison for us all. Okay, so can we give him a big hand for Chris?
Thank you guys. And I'm gonna start talking as I make my way over. You are it. You know, you guys are the ones who are out there showing a belief in the system and continuing to fight for something where I wear the pin, actually today, I think like not planned, but you mentioned the Voting Rights Act that I bought from the LBJ Presidential Museum when the Voting Rights Act was signed in August of 1965, if you were looking for the year. And I had the cheat sheet because it's literally written on the book. So August 6th, for those who were around then. I wasn't. And of course, when I was growing up in school, it was something that was a given. You know, the right to vote was established for everybody. The right to access the American dream was something that was accessible to everyone. All Americans are created equal was an achievement that was the ground floor, right? And only as I grew up and grew older, realized that was not always the case in our history, and worse, that that floor was not a floor at all, that there was a trapdoor underneath it. So while we all recognize that, you have lived that much more than I have, I think it's important to recognize that we have, there's a lock on that trapdoor, at least in the state of Wisconsin for now, and that is that we have a majority, there is a pro-democracy majority for now on the state Supreme Court. And that provides a stable ground for us to operate, for you to operate for this election cycle, because there's not a Supreme Court election in the state between now and 2025, when Justice Ann Walsh Bradley will be up. So I know you guys plan ahead way more than most, so mark in your calendars for that. But also, as there has been the threat against one of the justices who just won election, and I always remind her, you've only served 2% of your term and you're already threatening to impeach Judge Janet, that we just crossed that threshold on December 1st. For those of you that read my newsletter, you'll know that December 1st was a critical deadline, because after that, if the state Senate, which I'm a member of, a super minority member, which is not the super that you want in front of your name, if you're thinking. of being a superhero, but super minority member, they could impeach Judge Janet. And if they did that and any other member, the appointment that the governor would make would serve in that position until the year 2031, because it's now after December 1st. Had they impeached her or any other member, the appointment would have been filled this spring, this April election. And so by the way that the threshold works, we do have that trap door locked for the rest of this election cycle. And I say that because as much as I'm going to talk about some of the laws and the potential laws, a lot of the changes that have happened around elections have happened very haphazardly late in the game, with the state Supreme Court ruling, yes, that's just fine to lock the drop boxes and prevent those from happening, or to shorten the timeline for early voting, or shorten or eliminate the number or artificially limit the number of early voting sites around town. So this cycle, unlike previous cycles where, you open up your newspaper, or, you hit refresh on the news, or you get an alert and you kind of hold your breath, especially if it's in the last 2 weeks before the election, a few weeks before the election, wondering, is there going to be something that comes through that's going to knock us back a step and we're going to have to account for? The answer is going to be a resounding no for the next election cycle, which grants us a level of certainty that we frankly have not had in the last 15 years, right? So, and that is thanks to you, thanks to the work of people getting out the vote and establishing how important this state Supreme Court election was last cycle. So, imagine, if you will, and we've got the imaginary music going. Thank you for queuing that up. So imagine, if you will, a government body that is nonpartisan, independent, oversees elections, campaign finance, and ethics, with little controversy for almost 8 years. Now imagine that this body opens an investigation into a sitting governor, and that person succeeds in dismantling the organization, replacing it with two partisan bodies made up of political appointees. Does that sound familiar? What's going on? Well, you don't need to imagine it. That's exactly what happened under Scott Walker in 2015, when the Government Accountability Board, which is made up of a well-respected group of retired judges and oversaw elections and ethics for politicians and how elections ran in the state of Wisconsin. In 2015, amid what was called the John Doe investigation, they showed that Scott Walker had violated election law by illegally working with an outside group and coordinating an outside group in violation of not just our state, but federal law, which says that you cannot coordinate with an outside group. It's kind of the binding standard for how Citizens United can function. Can say you can give as much money as you want to these outside groups, but as long as they don't coordinate, you're not violating campaign finance laws. Wisconsin, since then and now, continues to be the only state where you can coordinate directly with an outside group, which is allowed to take unlimited amounts of money. And that is a result of the Wisconsin Election Commission doing its job, pointing this out, and being broken down. I got it wrong. The Government Accountability Board doing its job. And so they were attacked and replaced with a group called the Wisconsin Election Commission, which we have had then since 2015. So now the Wisconsin Election Commission, or WEC, W-E-C, was created by Republicans, passed with Republican votes to protect Scott Walker. And it was now, fast forward, is being used as an excuse as saying, yes, this group is favoring Democrats, and it is in bed with them. And they're attacking them for controversial decisions that they made before the 2020 election, which, by the way, were made on a 6-0 vote, right? 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats on the commission, appointed by Republicans, by Democrats, all voted for these things to happen. And the person who is in charge of that commission, Megan Wolf, implemented those decisions on behalf of that board. Things have gotten so bad that Robin Voss has called the commission lawless. He suggested that its members a couple years ago be charged with felonies for how they handled the election during the pandemic. And just to be clear, they acted the same way that just about every other state was acting. And they did this at a time, it's worth remembering, taking a trip down memory lane, even without the music, that we had the least active legislature in the history of the state of Wisconsin in 2020. Do you remember that? Where we had 200 straight days where the legislature refused to convene to deal with anything regarding COVID, anything regarding the elections, or anything regarding the overlap of the two. But what they did do afterwards, of course, was a healthy dose of Monday morning quarterbacking, which, I mean, I guess it's been, we've had that, although we had the Monday night game, Tuesday night quarterbacking here in the state of Wisconsin, of saying, here's what you could have done, what you should have done, threatening the election commissioner. Why are they doing this damaging crusade? And a lot of this is, you know, the actors. You have Michael Gableman, who was on a short leash. You had Racine County Sheriff Christopher Schmalling. You had Assembly Elections Chair Janelle Branchen, and national conspiracy theorists Mike Lindell, all descending on Wisconsin, all pushing this conspiracy theory. And why? Not just in service to Donald Trump, not just in service to the big lie. It is at the heart of what the question was earlier of undermining our faith in elections in the state of Wisconsin and getting people where people just throw up their hands and say, well, I don't trust what's going on anyways. It seems there's a lot of noise there. People are picking whoever they want. My vote is just a drop in the ocean that gets washed away anyways, and how can I even verify it? That is part of their goal, right, is to knock out the legs, to undermine faith in the system that we hold dear, that we have as a bedrock to our country. The 2020 election was free and fair. That should not be a controversial statement. I try to say that every time we're in a committee where this is brought up. An official recount of the presidential election results showed that it was free and fair. They targeted Dane and Milwaukee counties. They confirmed that, thanks to the good work of folks here, that it was a free and fair election. A legislative audit bureau confirmed this, and yet at least $1 million had been allocated in 2 separate sham elections, including Michael Gaba making a cool $11,000 a month. They were able to say that they showed no evidence of wrongdoing, and they were able to establish that the state did everything in the right. There's a few reasons they'd want to do this. None of them bode well for the future of our democracy. One is to play to the ego of Donald Trump, which is a big piece of what they're doing, and also to undermine confidence in the democratic process overall. One, of course, if they have the chance, is to then be able to rig the elections in their favor. Again, flashing back in this time where ideas were thrown at the wall like spaghetti, Ron Johnson came out and said he did think that the state legislature should have final authority over deciding how elections are administered in the state of Wisconsin. He, thanks to pushback by folks in this room and others, has backed away from that and not said it again since, but it showed a sign of where they wanted things to go. They also wanted to move towards a takeover of our elections. I think one of the scarier things about that, I'm skipping ahead, is that you had a member of the Joint Finance Committee running for Secretary of State last election with the explicit stated cause of being able to handle elections in the state of Wisconsin. Luckily, she lost to Doug LaFollette, but that has not stopped them from moving forward with their plan, in fact, introducing a bill just last week that would hand over the functions of the Wisconsin Election Commission to the elected Secretary of State. Gives them a chance to be able to win an office and then have oversight over how our elections are handled. So this is the step towards a takeover that they've tried lately. Of course, we know the results of their gerrymandering. The most recent one, these are still in the courts. Now the rumor is, if you're looking for good news, is to check the news over the next 2 weeks, is when the initial decision is expected to come out. So that's some insider knowledge for you as somebody who's the subject of the lawsuit as an odd-numbered senator, and perfectly fine with having to have my term abolished and have to run again as all the 5 of us Democratic state senators who are subject to the lawsuit right now. But that will be subject to further litigation, to appeal, and potential appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So every good news comes with a little bit, a little bit of another storm on the horizon. But that's par for the course, right? Like, there's no point where you hit the finish line and it's a movie ending where we're all done and we get to relax and take naps. The fact is, we always have to build to the next generation and make sure that they understand the importance of every election and continue to do that level of education. Just to give the latest update, I think most people are pretty intricately familiar with what happened with Egg and Wolf. But I think the thing that's interesting is the karmatic blowback that they got. In June, the election commission, do you guys remember this? The election commission, the Democratic members voted not to reappoint Megan Wolf to the position. The Republican members, the 3 of them, voted to move her forward. Because you need, and it's very clear in the bylaws, that you need 4 votes for the appointment to move to the state Senate for approval. Because they got 3, there was no appointment. And I say it's a karmatic twist of fate, because the state Supreme Court had ruled in the last, just a year earlier, because of the rogue DNR member and sometime dentist Fred Preen, who kept his DNR board chairmanship for 20 months after. And the Supreme Court, stepping in and making a ruling, said there is no appointment to there's no reason that person has to vacate it until a new appointment is made. And an appointment can be made, but if it's not voted on, then that appointment doesn't exist in the eyes of the court. And so the WEC board members recognized this. There was no appointment. And despite that precedent, the last thing Republicans did before they adjourned for the summer in June was to move forward a sham resolution voting down an appointment that did not exist. You can follow all of that. There's a lot of great Netflix specials out there that have but essentially, they did not have the appointment. We said that on the floor. We pointed it out. And it was only when, again, they were drawn before the court of law that they had to admit on the record that, yes, they did not have the authority to actually make an appointment by Megan Wolf. If only we got, to stand on the floor and say, we told you so. And if only that stopped their urge to continue to try and throw her out. But of course, we know what's going on. They're trying to undermine faith in Megan Wolf. Thank goodness she continues to be there. And by the way, I've never talked to her. She's not somebody who I perceive as being biased towards Democrats or Republicans, but I get that us standing up and saying having a good person in that position, is partisan. But that's part of what they're trying to do, is trying to make it seem that she's a partisan just by doing her job on a day-to-day basis, which is what we should expect of anybody in that position. There continues to be other threats on our democracy, and I'll move to those now. The legislation, I could talk about. Legislation gets introduced a lot, and I think it's a good sign of what they would like to do. I already mentioned the Secretary of State position of how they'd like that to be overseeing elections in the state of Wisconsin. And it's more of a sign of things to come, because right now, the governor still is using his veto pen to stop all of these pieces of legislation, so they don't move forward with as much vigor as they used to. That's the good news. And with all good news comes the bad news. So what the Republicans have done is they've started to move forward things that bypass the governor's veto pen. Do you know what that is? There it is. You guys pay attention. Constitutional amendments. So they've used the Constitution to try and go around the governor. So what they've done now is, I got to find my notes on it. There's 3 constitutional amendments that are moving forward, and they're in various stages that would change our elections to some degree or another. The first elections-related amendment was SJR 73. This would enshrine in the state constitution the highly restrictive voter ID. Wisconsin has the most restrictive voter ID in the country. This would put that in the Constitution. It's already law. We already have this, but this would make it that much harder for to reverse it, to allow for what we've had before, which is we don't have a problem with voter fraud. We don't have a problem with in-person people trying to fake out and say they're another person. There are laws in place. That is a felony. People go to jail almost every election cycle, and they're found. So thinking of the risk versus the reward, of the risk, you could get a felony. The reward, you would need hundreds, if not thousands of people to commit this voter fraud over to change the results of even a close election in the state of Wisconsin. It shows that this is not an actual problem. The real goal is to try and slow down the vote, particularly with students, where we still unfortunately have 1/3 of our campuses that do not give their students on their first day of school, first day of class, a compliant ID. And the reason is they have to have expiration dates on the ID for it to be used for voting purposes. IDs now, I'm gonna sound like an old man now, IDs now are not like they used to be, because IDs now have all kinds of chips and things in them, where you can use it to pay, where you can use it to open doors, where you can use it as your permanent ID. Your parents can load more money on there, if parents have money, they choose to. And so the universities, they cost a lot more than the little piece of plastic that just had your picture and a number on it. And so universities put this at a price tag of over $1 million if they had to, per campus, if they had to keep reissuing these every 2 years as required by state law. So 1/3 of our higher education institutions have decided not to do that, and so they can't be used. So, which is part of the reason why they move forward with that and why that's still part of it. But that's just neither here nor there. But it is, if you have spare time, or if you have connections to the universities, I'd be happy to give you the names of those that have not done it, because we're still gently trying to urge them to expend their limited resources to make sure that their students can vote, because it's in their good. I don't think I need to go on about what's going on with the UW system and how they're continuously being attacked. You all read the newspaper. But anyways, that's the, getting back to this, that is the first one. The earliest that could come to a referendum would be April 2025. And that's only if it's passed at the start of the next session for a constitutional amendment. So the second one, because constitutional amendments, have to be passed by 2 legislatures concurrently. So one legislature passes it through resolution, then the next legislature would have to pass it through resolution, then it goes to referendum. That's how our state constitution works. So the second one is SJR 71. This one is actually up this year, this cycle. It would limit voting in Wisconsin in all elections to U.S. citizens 18 and up. Other states have allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections as they pay taxes and work and live in the communities, and we believe in the concept of no taxation without representation. There's been a push by some in our state to allow voting at the age of 16 for people, especially in school board elections. They have an outcome. They have a vested interest in the outcome. There are states where that happens already. Massachusetts comes to mind. This amendment would take away that local control, the ability to pass that right on. Currently in Wisconsin, only 18-year-old U.S. citizens are permitted to vote, and it would take action by local officials or state officials to change that. This amendment would make those changes much, much harder. So this will be up for referendum during the November 2024 election. So I'm sure education efforts will start on that. The third is SJR 78, and that would prevent any private money or donated equipment from being used to administer elections in Wisconsin. This came about in the wake of Republican outrage over foundation grants to dozens of municipalities to help administer elections in the wake of the pandemic. So if you remember, there was a great need of making sure that there was public safety equipment just to make sure we could run an election during the pandemic. The Joint Finance Committee, as I mentioned, refused to convene, refused to act, but luckily there was grants available. There's always grants available for all types of different things in government, fortunately or unfortunately. The outrage came because they went and they helped people to vote. They did not influence the outcome, but Republicans have repeatedly refused to give sufficient funding to local clerks to administer elections, and this amendment would do nothing to rectify that, except it would prevent them from being able to accept money from outside groups. Government agencies at all levels, including police forces, public works departments, schools, use private grants and donated supplies all the time. To single out elections and say you're on your own is absolutely absurd. So I mentioned this one last because it's coming up the soonest. This will be on the April 2024 presidential primary spring election. So I know I mentioned 3 of them. I'll mention it again so you remember. This is the one that would prevent outside money from being spent to help administer elections. And it's very important because otherwise they have been defunded. So giving you some good news, at least 2 elections-related bills that are bipartisan in nature have passed and been presented to the governor. One requires municipalities to choose to if they choose to broadcast election night proceedings, as Milwaukee does, that video would have to be kept for 22 months. Court cases pending could alter the drop boxes a little for the better by allowing them to be used, and could also allow others to return a voter's ballot with their permission, but those may or may not be resolved before the election. So the law is what as I stated it, but keep in tune. And as always, I'll do my best to keep you informed. If you're getting my newsletters or if you follow me on social media, we do our best to do that.
Our next speaker is Claire Woodall. She's certainly a familiar person to almost everybody here. She's executive director of the Election Commission in Milwaukee, and she's going to tell you how she's going to solve all those problems.
Thank you, everyone. I will probably be short and sweet because you queued me up nicely. But I think whenever I'm speaking to anyone about voting in Wisconsin, this graph says it all. This is the cost of voting index, which is a nonpartisan group that analyzes the laws in a state and how difficult it is to vote. And in 1996, Wisconsin ranked 4th in the country. So on the far end, you can see we were very low cost. It was negative 1.362, and we were one of the easiest places to vote. Then in 2016, once we implemented photo ID, we limited the amount of time that you can vote early, the attempt to limit the number of locations. We started to go into the positive, which is not good in this. And now we rank 47th in the country for ease of voting. 47th. So when I moved here, I'm originally from Alabama, which has long been in the bottom part of ease of voting. But when I moved here in 2006, I thought this was an amazing place to live. We encouraged civic participation. We were a very purple state. And I came into elections in 2013 and have slowly watched this change. In Milwaukee, we face greater difficulty. Laws that restrict voting have a great influence over our voters more than anywhere else. And this is showing the turnout rate. The top part is the statewide turnout rate, and then the red emblems, little signs, is the city of Milwaukee turnout rate. So when we look at the 1980s, that is when we had the lowest gap. Actually in 1982, we had no gap. We were voting at the same rate as average turnout in the state. But in the past, was that 2018? Yes. In the past 4 years, we have seen the largest gap in history. So while we saw record turnout rates in Wisconsin in 2020, in Milwaukee, we were 16 points lower. So when I hear all these accusations that this grant money had such a huge effect on turnout and it skewed things, the money we received allowed us to ensure that voters maintained the status quo in the city of Milwaukee, where we had experienced the highest rates of death from COVID and additional barriers like access to the internet and comfort navigating issues with the mail system, We did everything in our power to make sure that voters maintained the status quo. We continue to see a lower rate, again, 16 consistently in 2022. This is by John Johnson at Marquette. You can just Google it and easily find his. He did great analysis this past March of this data. So I don't need to tell all of you, but I do have this, and I'll send out the slides. I'll send them to Anita afterwards. But here's an election calendar that I put together for the Common Council who likes pictures of the election dates, and then also which contest would be on it. So we are also going to work to create more election materials in the Election Commission, so I can also get this to you to hand out en masse if you'd like. Senator Larson just went over this, but kind of what can we expect in 2024? There is a lawsuit around the use of drop boxes. We currently cannot use them. I remain forever an optimist, though, so at our libraries, they are still all covered up with black tarps and locked, because I want to be ready to go if we get a favorable court case. We will have a ceremony at every drop box until the day of that. Also, the early absentee ballot processing for the Monday. I testified before the Senate committee on Tuesday. The chair was very fortunate. He let me go after Representative Branchen and Peter Bernacre so that I could provide facts. No, we laughed, but it was actually very disturbing to me. It was a room full of familiar faces to me who are observers at Central Count, and to hear them accuse us of things like 2.5-hour dinner breaks, or that we sent everybody home and demanded that the Republican observers leave at 10 p.m. in 2020, makes it hard to be the eternal optimist. It's people who I have worked with for years, who were in the room, who know what happened. We have Terry Perry and Ann DeLeo here, who are two of our supervisors of Central Count. And at no point do I ever encourage observers to leave. In every single general election, they have been there till the bitter end, and sometimes that's 1:30 in the morning, and in 2020 it was at 3 a.m. One of their big critiques was that I just needed more machines and more people. And I will share that the money that I spent from grants, 90% of it went to purchasing additional tabulators that cost over $1 million, and to paying our poll workers $100 each extra when they were working in 2020. That solved our poll worker problem so much that the Common Council and the mayor have since had the buy-in where we continue to pay a stipend that is worth taking a day off to work in elections. So we're still one of the highest paid, us in Madison, because of the value that that brought and stability to our poll worker force. So we're not spending money on, quite frankly, we didn't spend much money on voter education or outreach, other than helping people navigate the MyVote site at libraries. The majority of our funding was spent on very practical things that cost a lot of money. Also, hoping that we'll get a common sense change via court case to who can return an absentee ballot. The fact that two people, if it's a husband and wife, let's say, have to park a car and both get out is insane. It's like, well, I can see your wife in the car. And then we also face, and I think this is where people who aren't close to elections are making decisions, is voters use absentee voting for many reasons, but one of them oftentimes is that they're going out of town at the last minute. So they get notice on Monday that they're going to go out of town. They request a ballot, we mail it to them, they get it Wednesday, they fill it out, and they leave it for a spouse or a roommate to drop off because they're going to be out of town for the next week. You've, in effect, made it so that that person cannot then vote at all because you aren't allowing them to designate someone else to return their ballot. So it's having great effects that we see every single day in the Milwaukee that I just don't think people close enough to elections see. We have another change, which I am excited about, but with every change comes a new challenge. And let's redesign the absentee envelopes. You can kind of see it right here. And the change is that state statute does require a witness to print their name and sign their name. We now have uniform directions about what constitutes a valid address, which I'm very excited about. It was our definition all along, which is each witness has to provide their street number, street name, and their city. So we have clear guidance on that. Some clerks were also requiring the state and the zip code, and we're rejecting ballots if they didn't have that. But the new challenge is getting people to understand they have to print and sign their names. We are in the middle of election season, and we've begun certifying nomination papers in my office. I have seen over 25 signatures that have had to be disqualified because the voter signed but didn't print. You have 2 columns, instructions are right there. I can read those voters' signatures. It's not illegible. I can tell that that says Mary Brooks, but I can't count it because Mary Brooks didn't then print her names carefully. So I do think this is going to have a big effect, and there is current guidance in place that we are not able to cure ballots. So if I can read her name, I can't write in Mary Brooks. I have to mail it back to the voter, and the voter has to take it to the witness to have it cured. The hoops that we are making people jump through just to vote. We did already talk about this, the redistricting lawsuit, WEC administrator. One thing that I recently read, which really stuck with me, was this Public Religion Research Institute, in partnership with Brookings, found that an overwhelming majority of Americans believe that democracy is at risk in the upcoming presidential election. 1/4 of those said that American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. And that was not skewed. That was people saying on both sides that we may have to resort to violence to save the country. So while I am hopeful and I am forever the eternal optimist, that is the only way you can do this job anymore, I think that it is definitely frightening as we go into next year, especially when I sat in that room on Tuesday, hearing people who I've known for years just stand up there and tell outright lies. Now, they definitely believe some of what they're saying, but they are also just telling things that are lies, which is frightening when we continue to have this question of what is a fact. It definitely is continuing to plague us still long after 2016, when I think we first saw that begin to be an issue. So what is the city doing? We are having a citywide voting campaign next year. The Common Council just passed, and the mayor initially was the one that kind of directed me to engage every single city department in a voting campaign. So what that means is if someone's applying for a job with the city, we're going to start to include a question about, are you registered to vote? And then it'll flag to get information about registering to vote. We are going to, at the call center, anytime you're on hold and it's close to an election, it's going to tell you can go to My Vote to check your voter registration status and find your polling place. If you are interacting at the health department, civic health is part of your health, and you're working within your community and being part of your community. So fun ideas like that. I also have a fun campaign of puns, so get ready. My one for DPW is don't throw away your vote. And it'll have a trash can. It's going to go in every single garbage can in the city with a QR code. With a QR code for people to go to My Vote, which I thought it was like a crazy ask. And when I asked the DPW commissioner, he was like, oh, absolutely, but how much is that going to cost? We're going to get it done. So there is a lot of excitement within the administration to make sure that everyone is on board, not just our libraries, who have been our longtime amazing partner here in the city of Milwaukee. We also are committed to maintaining convenient access to voting. And we do this, we get a lot of flack. We do this, and we've expanded early voting on both sides of Milwaukee. We started using Serb Hall last year because in 2020 we saw such a demand for early voting on the south side, they had to close the Milwaukee library so that we could be in the entire library. So when I saw that happen, I said, well, where else can we be on the south side? And we now lease Serb Hall, which is a huge landmark on the south side, very well known, so that all voters have access to early voting. Midtown is our most popular early voting site. You all know that it was under threat The new owners were really difficult, not wanting to work with me. And then when they did start to work with me, the prices were astronomical for a very low or high vacancy shopping center. But we did everything we could. I worked with Alderman Chambers and took every single phone call, went to see lots of properties. But we ended up finding a bank directly across the street that we think in many ways is going to serve our needs better. From a security standpoint, it is more secure than Midtown. We're going to have a vault where we can lock ballots in and machines. We have a dedicated parking lot just for voting. It has overflow parking. You can access it from from both directions on 60th Street and eastbound on Capitol. It is a step off of the bus line. And I'm confident that it's so close that we're going to make sure that anyone who goes to the old location doesn't get discouraged by being redirected a mile away. And that was what was really important to me when we were looking for spots. I was ready to build something just on the parking lot. So we are a staff of, we are 9, but I did get the council to also fund 2 more positions next year. So we are turning into a staff of 11. But 11 people are not going to change voter interest and engagement in Milwaukee. What I hear when I talk to voters is just complete disconnect over why any of this matters to them. So what I would say is when you're engaging with voters, figuring out what's important to them and then how the government is working for them. But if you start to explain to them programs that exist, the health clinic, they're going to start to say, this is all funded by tax dollars. That's how we're able to give this to you today. That's why it matters who's in office. These are the programs that government is providing. That's our goal, I have this big idea to the mayor that we need an Office of Civic Engagement, where you take all of those silos of people who are masters of their program, and you put them all into one department, and you have them going out door to door, connecting with the entire city and telling them how their local government is working for them. Because it's only, it's only when we get voters to realize that their government, we saw this with the sales tax. It couldn't go to a vote. We couldn't let it do that because voters don't know how the sales tax or not having it would impact their life until it would be horrible. And so we need to do a better job of telling voters and showing them how government is working for them. At the city, we are really looking for big ideas and ways to be more efficient, but also more effective in how we're interacting with people. So I'm very excited whenever I get to talk to him about my big ideas. But then the power partnership, it's you guys who are out there in the community, how we are able to make a difference.
Let's just sort of see a raise of hands. How many work either on election day or an early vote at a polling location, pushing people to vote, whatever? I think probably the vast majority. Those of you who don't, we need you. You can work half days or whole days, but many of the municipalities need it, but probably especially more.
We're doing good. We pay well. But we don't ever turn anyone down.
And there's a lot of great details in here and a lot of important stuff. I think we also got to be real about what's going on. When I saw that figure of how many people in Milwaukee do not vote, that's an alarm bell. It is more than everything that we're talking about. We're talking about peanuts, and they're talking about getting rid of the vote. And a lot of it isn't because they've done things. It's because people don't think there's any reason to vote. And let's be real about it. And so I think we have to think of other things. So we're trying to work with a program with Claire on the voting side, try to make it a center of people's activities over there. And then so you actually try to bring people into this thing and that they're not sort of outsiders or trying to get the figures out. And I won't make another speech, but I think we should have a longer meeting to discuss some of these things for real. Because I don't think if we just do the same thing, this is not the same, and here's the other thing, is this is not the same election that we've ever had. It just is not. And when you see the president, the ex-president, what he says and what goes, this is a different year. We shouldn't be thinking about 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. This is a different year. The other thing is, I don't know how you guys think about it, is they don't do anything for breaking people's, when they do something wrong in voting. I've never, I go to people and say, well, why don't you go over here and sneak over here and do this? Oh, no, we might get put in jail or something. I have not seen anybody go to jail for doing anything around voting. The system is.
Well, there's not much wrong going around voting.
I know,
but
but
I was going to say, but I do work with Matt Westfall at the district attorney's office, and there are cases that are prosecuted.
I know little bitty cases, but they're not big giant cases. They're pretty much staying away, letting people do what they're going to do.
Well, the former deputy director of my office has been charged with felony that they are not letting go of, so I would beg to differ on at least in
Okay,
Milwaukee
all right.
County, how we treat
We
any type
could
of
talk
election.
about that, but I see a lot of stuff anyway.
Let's let some other people ask questions. Go ahead.
Two things. If people are looking for an opportunity to do something about voting, Vote Riders helps people get IDs, birth certificates. There are 11 million people in the country who do not have proper ID to vote because of all the voter ID stuff. So that's one thing. And now I have a question for you, Senator Larson. Did you say that Walker dissolved the GAB, the Government Accountability Board, by executive action? And if he, I was going to say, why can't Evers reinstate it with executive action?
No, it's, I'll stand up here. Sorry, I skimmed a little bit of that, but basically the Governor Walker was under investigation through the John Doe, through John Chisholm's office, and was working with the Government Accountability Board. And I remember when we all came into session because it was very clear that Governor Walker was in hot water. And so Scott Fitzgerald, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, and Robin Vos, who was the Speaker then and is now, they moved to pass laws. As they were saying publicly, the governor has not violated any laws. They changed the laws to make sure that that would be true, allowing for the coordination. And then they also said, this is a lot of the echoing of the same statements we're hearing now. This is a corrupt body that's in bed with the Democrats. We have to eliminate them and find one that's more modeled off of the Federal Election Commission, which is built in to have a deadlock on every major decision. And so they said, this will be fine because if there's any conflict, it'll deadlock and the status quo. So they created the Wisconsin Election Commission as a result of that in 2015. And it was only within, 3 years that they were already starting to shake their fist at WEC and saying, this administrator who they all voted for unanimously, Mike Haas?
Yep.
Yeah, that they said, he's in bed with the Democrats. We got to toss him out. And they appointed who they said was the neutral person to say that this person is going to be above board. We will put them in and they will be above reproach. That person was Megan Wolf.
From Waukesha. She's
Right.
originally from Waukesha.
Right. So the cycle continues, and it's almost like if there's this idea, we'll give in to letting it shift over to the Secretary of State. That'll be the new one. I have a feeling we'll be in the same exact situation, holding the football for Charlie Brown 3 years down the road.
All right, let's go. A couple more questions. Go ahead, Theo.
Well, I went to a town hall with my alderperson, Marina, everybody knows her, and she had both police precincts. She had the fire chief, she had city services, she had the sanitation department. So as Claire was saying, right there you could find out what your tax dollars are doing for you, and if they were doing something you needed done, how to fix it, how to go about fixing it. And it was just terrific. I hope we do more of that education, because I went to this town hall, one of my first town halls ever, and I was really impressed with the information that was given out. But, Sue?
Two things. One to Chris, not to Chris, but regarding the proposed amendments, the language in the amendments, when they are coming from a certain side of the aisle, it's worded so that somebody reads it and goes, why would I be against that?
Yeah.
I don't want outside money coming in. Hey. And so I don't know what kind of an education effort needs to be made to let people know what this is really about, because most people, when they read it, if they even bother to read the long explanation, get so lost, they're like, well, that sounds reasonable to me. And it's not reasonable. So I don't know who would be in charge of an education program on these amendments and the wording in them, but I think it's crucial. The other thing is that I do voter registration through the League of Women Voters at Milwaukee high schools, and the apathy among the students is, we can't even get them to come into the room to register to vote. The last place I was at Marshall High School, and the teacher that was running the effort in the career and counseling centers was calling to classrooms and saying, here are your students who are 18, send them down to register. And the teacher would go, they don't want to come. They don't want to come. And when we get a kid in there, they'd say, why bother? It doesn't matter. I'm not going to vote. It doesn't matter. And they come in and they'll register. Are you going to vote? Probably not. I don't know. Maybe it's having a bunch of old white ladies in trying to get this 18-year-olds to register. I don't know. We may be the wrong people doing it, but I don't know who else can do it or how to handle that. So that's just throwing it out there.
But a lot of it is, they view it as a monolith, as like everybody in government is working together, but they're not really having a social contract that's put forward that helps your generation, right? They've seen their older siblings go to college and come back home to live with them with debt that is insurmountable. They've seen them unable to start a family, unable to buy a car, unable to buy a house because the social contract has not been forwarded to that generation. And the only way that changes, to say the only way it changes, they want you not to vote, because then nothing changes. The only way it changes is if you realize one thing that you care about more than anything can change. If you lock arms with your friends, with your generation, and say, get out there and actually do something with it. Now, there's a lot that the Biden administration has done to try to eliminate college debt. There's a lot that they've done in terms of investment, which is hard to explain, but you really have to find that one thing. And then what happens with that young voter is they find that one thing and they realize, wait a second, voting can make a difference. And once you get that change to happen, it stays with them.
My question is for Claire. I'm forever, we have a hard time getting volunteers for the February election in particular, April election. And one of the things I tell people is somebody who votes in February is gonna vote in November. And I'm just wondering if you have any data to back that up, because I kind of just made it up.
So I think the political parties have done a lot more data crunching of that information, but I do know it to be true. I do not have that data because of there's some issues in our database that limit my ability to crunch the data, but I think that WEC would confirm that. Somewhat, that's what you call your hardcore every election voter.
I'm reading a book called The Sixth Extinction, right? And it is how we are heading towards destroying this planet because we are not addressing climate change in a meaningful way. And that is a judgment against generations of leaders who have not done anything. This generation doesn't have a choice. The generation coming in right now doesn't have a choice. They're gonna have to deal with a warming planet. As much as we appreciate nice October weather here in the middle of December, it's gonna be a huge problem for the rest of the country, because we are having problems with crops becoming available and people being able to be fed, and much less the growing refugee crisis that is gonna be happening worldwide as a result of it. So making sure that we have that. And I think the biggest one is that this is your voice. This is your voice. This is how to use it. What you say on Facebook, what you say on Twitter, what you say on any other social media site is one thing. If you think you have something to say, if you think you have a stance that you believe in, the one place that it matters more than any of those is voting. That's where it actually has an impact. If you want to be an influencer, that's being an influencer.
right, thank you all for coming. We will have-